I mean, it's a conversation at the end of the day, shifting the conversation around the South African cricket team and that narrative that exists.
These type of conversations are happening in casual commentary at braais at home with people that are just watching the game and those sort of things. And we're wanting to do nothing different than having that same sort of conversation, perhaps just lift the lid somewhat, lift the caliber of the conversation, because we've already peeked behind the curtains or under the covers, if you want to use that term, right?
As soon as you get clear on your motivations and your purpose and your intention, a lot of things can start falling into place.
Yeah.
A lot of things become automated. A lot of things all of a sudden goes, oh, okay, cool, that's how I'm going to do it. So the hows become very clear when the whys are clear.
These guys are hopeful that they're winners. They're not seeing themselves as winners entering it. Despite their having illustrious careers, it's a matter of coming together under the Proteas brand is where things come unstuck in a way.
So the identities of our local cricketing ecosystem has been completely eradicated at a provincial level. There is no longer that sort of, oh, I want to play for this team. Yeah.
It's like taking someone that's not familiar or not comfortable or used to being free and not shown how to handle that freedom. It's the same sort of analogy when we start talking about a playing philosophy of playing with freedom.
All exciting stuff that we're going to get into, right? All exciting stuff that we're going to get into. I'm already like salivating a little bit. Hey, just want to say before we get into this conversation that during the conversation, both Russell and myself mentioned that we're not going to name and shame. However, through the natural flow of the conversation, we do mention some organizations and some individuals by name. And we want to make it clear that we're not calling people out in the purpose of naming and shaming, but more in the name of transparency, that we've done work. We've been in environments. We've seen some things, and it is textured by our own perspective and our own thoughts and our own opinions. And it's not done in a malicious way or with malicious intent to point the finger and say bad, wrong, don't do it like that.
Yeah, I think also, the fact that we're doing it in the spirit of truly finding connections and resonance with each other to build this equity of relationships. Sometimes we have to be a little bit more straightforward as we lift the lid, lift the covers, and we discover a few things and it's a little bit uneasy. And we have to be a little bit direct. So in the spirit of truly finding that the resonance and connection, this is why we maybe mention the name and drop the shame.
Cool. Awesome. Enjoy the conversation. Let us know what you think. Yeah, okay, it's recording.
Okay.
Cool. Maybe I should record from the start because all the nice bits for the
build-up.
The build-up or the pre-video comes sometimes out of that more than it comes out of the actual conversation. So
yeah,
or it's nice to use that because it's not the same as the conversation. So it piques the interest and then people get some other stuff. Cool. Yeah. Right. Are we good to go? We're good to give this give it everything we got.
Yeah, 100%. And you can also pause it and make an interlude if you want to, like, have a break if you want to, because I mean we've got, what is it, an hour, 2 hours here, so you can hour and a half at least. So you can choose, you lead it.
Yeah, cool. Right, Russell. Today is going to be interesting, I think, because the topic that we're covering is, immediately my thinking was when I thought about us doing this thing. First sort of stuff that you see is this article by Firdaus Munda. Sort of just hit me straight away, right? T20 World Cup squad, CSA criticized for failing to meet transformation targets. And it's a touchy subject, and I think it's going to be so cool to lift the covers on this with you. And it's always interesting for me that very early in World Cup campaigns, we do see these types of articles through the course of a year. But it's always like towards the World Cup, towards build-up. These racial issues, color of the skin, transformation, what's being done at grassroots level. Why aren't we seeing enough Black African cricketers of quality coming through the system? Always become more highlighted at this time. And I'm always curious what's the effect of that. I'm really excited to be chatting with you about that today.
Let me jump in 2 feet with you.
Yes.
On that. I mean, you just highlighted something before we actually get to the nuts and bolts of it. I think one thing is that's evident for me, having the experience inside the cricket system, is that For the most part, I think why it gets highlighted at this point is because times when normal kind of processes are unfolding or normal seasons are going, there may be a silencing or a redundant kind of suppression of these type of voices. So when it comes to World Cup, the emphasis is now being utilized to kind of highlight or to heighten the voice of people who feel marginalized and not being recognized. So therefore, these things come to the fore now. So it's almost like this is the perfect time moment to actually have a say, where we can be heard. And I think that's why it often comes up in conversations and across media platforms, because obviously we have the tag that always kind of been our historical repeat, you know what I mean? So it kind of just goes synergistically with that. And people who wanted to have a voice are now coming in, having an echo of similar sentiments that hasn't changed. So that's just how I think is unfolding in the moment.
Yeah. I want to also maybe just say at the start of this conversation, and I agree with what you say there, and I can understand that, right? Because now the light is shined on the World Cup, and so it's a time for us to have a bit of a pedestal to scream again and shout again similar things to what we've screamed and shout every single time. And I don't know if there's a lot of benefit in that necessarily, but I'm sure we'll get into that. I just want to make a statement, and I know you agree with me on this, that we're not insensitive in these conversations, specifically around these issues, to the challenges that we face as South Africans, to the challenges that do exist within our country, not just the cricketing system. And the reason I think these conversations are a little bit tricky is that you don't necessarily get to say everything you think and feel. We've got a time that we're sort of limited and bound by. And so I just want to make the listener aware that even though we're having this conversation, in the time that we are having it, that we're speaking and we're saying the things with that in mind, right? At the back of both of our minds, that we're not insensitive to our past and where we come from, and the injustices that have lived and happened within our society. Having said that, we also yet to talk about a cricket team that needs to, have to, maybe to a certain extent, go perform on a world stage. And it's the balance of those two things that we're trying to understand better in these conversations.
Yeah, I think the distinguishing aspect here for a lot of conversations that might still be happening around these sort of articles is the fact that we're at the performance space or performance zone, as you said, putting on the pedestal of this World Cup, right? It's a high-performing challenge and test, and everyone's kind of looking excitedly forward to see what might come. At the same time, it's also these, as I said, these previous voices of development or transformation also come to the fore. So it's this balanced nuance between both the performance lens or frame that we're looking at things through, and wanting this excellence to be portrayed as a winning nation and all those sorts of aspirations that we have idealistically. But at the same time, also trying to be a voice and be someone that's inclusive, the game of inclusivity, where development and the game is a game for all, those areas are also covered at the same time. So we have these nuances that are playing itself out. And that's where as you said, the sensitivity we have is that we're taking cognizance of both. We're not having a narrative that we're pushing only the win for mere shallow reasons of just saying we eventually want an ICC World Cup won by the Proteas. We would prefer that the cup is not just, for lack of a better way of saying it, an empty cup, but something that has substance to it, that actually has a meaningful impact. When we do eventually win, we win with a particular cause and an impact on society. Firstly, the cricket communities that is going to be impacted by it, but also the broader society as we support the team. So definitely we have a definite sense of openness for difficult conversations and a sensitivity about what has been and how we are currently positioned and where we would like to see ourselves as we lift this cup.
Yeah. And so I want to encourage everybody, if they're listening to this and they've got comments or things that they feel we're missing out on, or they've got a different perspective to ours, please let us know, and Russel and I will happily have another conversation about this. I think we both spoke about potentially bringing a guest on. There's been a little bit of interest around that, and so we're very much open to do another version of this conversation and hear different voices and other voices of things that we maybe haven't considered, right? Yeah. So there's this article, right, that was written that you sent to me. It's written in Cape Town, etc. I'm not too sure who it was written by, but there's a part of this that sort of jumps at me straight away. Just when you thought they couldn't get any worse, CSA has plummeted to a new low because in 2024, they want us to believe there is only one black African cricketer good enough to make a 15-player touring squad to the Cricket World Cup. If you hear something like that, right, thinking and your understanding of the cricketing ecosystem for the last 25 years, let's say, I don't know if I have the dates and the times 100% accurate with that, but if
very close,
25 to 30 years, right, out of apartheid, there's this idea that we're doing this life together in South Africa, and we hear something like that after so much time, we're still at a place where this is a concern and an issue. Where does that take your mind, and where does that get your thinking going?
Yeah, look, I think we need to be aware. I mean, we're not going to have a history lesson necessarily too much today, but I think we need to be aware of where we've come from, in a sense where upon reunification in 1991, when we went, to India to break kind of the shackles of this sport isolation and ban, so forth. Cricket was the driver of that. So we started out sending a team, a representative team, and I think the author of that article referenced that particular event. It was an all-white team as well that went there, barring one or two, call it black faces. And in that regard, it was at that time, as I previously said on my SJN hearings, right? It was a way of suggesting that we're coming together, but we need to find a way to kind of amalgamate. So once we were always apart and separated, i.e. we had a term for it, apartheid, which is separation. And as a result of it, now all of a sudden we needed all band together and say, okay, we're one collective now. However, what was assumed back then, and which is being highlighted consistently throughout the 30 years, is that when we unified on the basis of those who had the privilege, were the established cricket unions and structures at the time, who had the privilege of those infrastructures. They presumed to have ownership of cricket. And the ones that were being excluded in times past were just now tolerated or included or embraced. So there was this disparity that played out subtly, but it had a massive impact over time. And what that often looks like is like a paternalistic, leadership style, where one understands oneself to be a little bit more superior or autocratic or dictator in a way, for lack of a better term. And as a result of it, there's sub-levels of associations or belonging, right? I don't know if you're following with me there, Jody.
Yes, I am.
But essentially, all those who were previously marginalized, who are now welcome, are still feeling like sub-citizens or members of this union, because there was still the elite or established kind of sense of we are the ones that are controlling and inviting you in. It's our table and you coming to be a part of our table. So that has never really shaken off, and there's constantly this pushback. And when we truly talk about this rainbow nation ideal or narrative, it's about actually dismantling those paternalistic type of nuances, right? Which comes across as in rights, ranks, privileges, a lot of rules also. I mean, we've got the rules of transformation with X amount of players per team and all of that. So that paternalistic approach to the game is actually the thing that's crippling us, and why these sorts of conversations are constantly being brought up and creating a big stir amongst race groups across the board, all South Africans, right? Because from our different lenses, we're constantly dealing with this subtlety that is actually kind of to bite us in the butt in a way. So that legacy of apartheid hasn't really shaken over for the 30 years. We've gone through evolutions of it. But I think each time we get to these prize positions of the World Cup, it's an opportunity to look under covers and really try and address it. Really trying to look at smack bang at the raw truth about it and try and see if we can transition from it. And it takes us all to do that. We need to be quite brave to really look and see what's underneath there. and actually confront the raw, naked truth about it. Because these are subtle things that people get offended by based on their egos, and they have justifications to suggest that their frame of reference, their perspectives is accurate because they're looking at through these rosy colored petals, and that's all they can see. So everything is tainted that way. But if we are willing to be empathetic to each other, we can start saying, no, I'm willing to be critically minded and look at it through the way you're looking at it, Jody. And likewise, you be prepared to be mature enough and look at it through the way I see it. And let's see if we can find that middle ground. Because until we do that, we're going to forever have these conversations, which at this point in time doesn't seem to suit the chances of a team going 15-member squad to just focus on excellence when we neglected this conversation for so long and we didn't really address it. So as the system, and I'm saying this in confidently because the system in South Africa, as you will be aware from previous articles too, that the current leadership at CSA has actually announced and declared that the system has basically failed. Hence, they're saying we only have one Black African representative at the squad, in the squad. So it has failed. So if we have failed, then let us really look and see how we can improve. Failing in itself is a lesson to move on and succeed. So this is where I feel once we hit that rock bottom, almost like like an addict admitting I'm an addict. So now from this point of rock bottom, we can start building because we kind of hit the rock and building on foundations from here on onwards. With all this knowledge and all this know-how of what we've tried and attempted, we can actually readdress it in a proper way. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you say there that resonates really well with me, and it's something that as a white person in South Africa, when we went into this whole apartheid thing at the start, right? There was out of it. I remember back then there was this big resistance in the white community, you know? Oh, now we got these other colors coming to take our kids' spots, essentially, right? To like really water it out to the bare nuts and bolts. And I think as time evolved, we got into a place where it was, okay, we're not seeing color anymore, right? So we just see the cricketer. We just see this is you're skilled or you're not skilled. And about 2 years ago, I had a long conversation with Louis Mantata, and he shifted my perspective on this completely. And I think you alluded to it a little bit there. So it's the idea of not discounting where people has come from, that ability to hear the other person's voice, that ability to walk in their shoes, to actually understand what it is that they're going through or what it is that they've gone through. You know, we don't know. People can walk around with a smile on their face, but we got no idea what life they're living or what they're busy going through or what their experiences have been. And so I think that is an important point that you sort of raised there, that I just want to put a little bit of emphasis from my side too, that I think it is super important to be able to go, yes, we are where we are. Yes, we're still only producing one Black African cricketer good enough under that banner of the performance of if we're thinking into the performance of a team. And hey, maybe there are more that's good. Are they the best in our country yet? Maybe not quite yet. Maybe there's brewing underneath the surface. You see a Peter Ngaba who's on the tour to West Indies now. So there's maybe another one, Black African cricketer coming through. And so it's not like they don't exist. It's if we think of the performance element, are they at that standard yet? That's for other people to decide. I'm not a selector yet, but I think being able to hear each other's voices and understand where we're coming from is a crucial ingredient in shifting the narrative, right? Because it can't just be what we're thinking or what they're thinking, or this is how it should be based on a Black African perspective necessarily. It should be like, let's start really understanding, like, where are we all at with this? What is our thinking?
Yeah, and for me also that sense of compassion or willingness to look through the lens of another and meeting them at that point, right? It's a good starting point. There are a lot of things that kind of got left behind, what people missed out as a result of the past. And that goes for all color races, right? And this is some of the sensitivities that we need to extend a little bit of a leniency, a little bit of a grace. And I think that trust aspect was assumed or was kind of encouraged and hoped for back in the day. But I think we lost the spirit of that trusting aspect over the years, where the shift has gone purely to let's just keep having reaching for number one, let's keep excellence and allow this trickle down effect of the development will kind of sort itself out. But because of our heaviness of our history, we couldn't just pursue the ambition of being number one and sustaining that legacy without tightly holding on to who is the next generation following us. So we needed to find a link between the two, and particularly those who were marginalized in times past. It is imperative that we'll be able to, our stories are the ones that are going to drive the sense of excellence. Even for the elites who are pursuing, it's a unique landscape that we're operating in South Africa. So we kind of need to understand empathetically and with compassion where people have come from and what they've missed out on. And when we do that, then our particular game of excellence can go to another level. But when we separate the two and when I have two separate languages, I think that's where we get in this hot potato, hot seat type of thing, where we again having an expression or a feeling of apartheid, where some are privileged more than others. The elite, excellent now, versus the other ones who are still needing to be developed for excellence. And you have this sense, I mean, we know it in cricket examples where players are asked to come on tour, for instance, and I'm just bringing this up as a context, just to come and learn the environment, learn how professional environments operate. And automatically there's an assumption that you're not aware of it, and any youngster would feel that way, right? You come in black, white, or it doesn't matter what you are. You come into the space and you need to kind of get groomed up in excellence. But because of how the unifications happened, and I'll say plainly, that excellence was white excellence, and it was assumed as much as white excellence back in the day. So white excellence kind of stemmed down and saying, we are permitting or inviting you into our excellence. But as we discovered along the way, we needed a little bit more of a flair of black and colored and Indian and all of that, because the game had a whole unique way of looking differently when we had all of those contributions. And that's what we learned. So we just needed to maintain the right spirit of trusting one another and saying we need every single contribution. I'll use, for instance, Hashim Amla, for instance, the unique way of playing, or Paul Adams with his unique style of bowling back in the day. Those things you would never necessarily find it, because the way it was coached back there was according to the manuals, you know. So all these little subtleties could have come through, and the dominancy of just one way is only way is what constantly comes back to kind of sabotage our success, if you want to, because we are greater together. The diversity, the strength is in the diversity. And we just need to understand that there's two languages that often clash. It's the excellence and the development. But there is a language we can have in the middle where there's common ground, where it overlaps between that performance and development space. And I'm using the word development, not so much transformation, because transformation in itself in South Africa, particularly under CSA's imperatives and policies, it's been labeled a uniquely different thing compared to development. Development is when you're progressing and you're developing, becoming from an amateur to a pro, whether that's on a personal level or cricket skill-wise, whether it's soft skills or hard skills. So I like the terminology of development more so than transformation. But I understand that narrative.
Yeah, I think when I hear those words, for me, performance to me means you're at your best. You're striving to be at your best. Development means you're upskilling. In other words, and upskilling isn't color dependent. A skill is a skill. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. If you can do the thing, you can do the thing. And if you can't do the thing yet, you can practice to do the thing. It's you know, and maybe some of us, and again, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, but some of us have a little bit of a head start, right? I have a certain talent or an innate ability to do something, right? It's easy for me to catch a ball. It's maybe not easy for somebody else to catch a ball yet, but they can work at that and get better at it. So when I hear those words, that's sort of where my head goes with it. And I don't know if that sort of sits with what you say, but it sounds similar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to add a unique element here too. So obviously I've worked inside professional teams, particularly for the angle of excellence of performance, right? My even in the title of my work, it's performance. We need to have that outcome. But what I found was that performance is engaged with differently. So within in certain professional teams, particularly in South Africa, it's assumed that as I said, the narrative of how performance gets done is one way and uniquely kind of bunted all the way through. And systemically, you're creating this disparity between this ranking disparity that this is the answer, this is the way. And there are people in hierarchy within our domestic structures that serve as gatekeepers for that kind of fixed mentality, fixed mindset. And therefore, the subtlety of that leadership style, that autocratic leadership style, gets kind of imposed on you. There's no sense of free will to decide and to express yourself. So that performance actually gets very much suppressed and oppressed, and people get relegated in terms of importance, right? Now, there's a lot of counter experiences to that, but for the most part in the system, there's not much leeway because they are still kind of the old mentality of being constantly controlling others instead of being a little bit more freeing and allowing people to find expression, whether from any form of race group. So again, that type of evolution or change or maturation is a slow tending move, but unless we face it head on, kind of like the elephant in the room, and we really address it, those changes are not gonna be overnight or just without intentionality, right? It needs to be addressed directly. And this is why we are having the domestic structures not seeding a lot of Black African players or non-white players over the years, because there is a sense of gatekeeping, kind of oppressive authority, this paternalistic type of leadership that's still guarding the gates and not allowing the freedom of expression in a way. And that's where the fight, this kind of fight for our space, if you want to call it, our equal space. We in this space, it's this narrative of being selected, but not chosen. The difference. You know what I mean? So, and that's the main thing.
Yeah, so I'm hearing between the lines, and I'm not sure if my brain sort of has made complete sense of this 100% what you're saying. I will be honest.
Sure.
But I'm hearing between the lines, and I'm going to try and make sense of this at this point in time. I'm hearing this idea that there's this history. I'm hearing that because of that history, and even at that time, there was a system in place, that parts of that system has prevailed, and that even though the color of the landscape looks different, the systemic sort of nature of some things or some parts of our system, maybe all of it, is very much still not allowing a free-flowing thinking of, say, the idea, the simplicity of the idea of we don't see color, right? It is still very much a color thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm wording that really well, right? Because in an ideal world, that, like, this is how my head thinks about it. In an ideal world, we want to pick a cricket team, and that is the best cricket team our country can pick to go to a World Cup, any tournament around the world at any given point in time, and that cricket team is fully representative of our country. Now, there's conflicting thoughts and ideas here. So, like, this one article alludes to the football team, that the football team is fully representative, of South Africa, because 90% of our country is, or I don't know what the exact stats is, so don't quote me on that, but a large portion of our country is Black African, and so the football team is more representative of that. But then there's the counter argument that says, yes, you can think of it like very plainly like that. Look at the big picture. You go look at the demographics and say, well, the largest part of our country is Black African or of color, the white is less. So then our national team should have more of color, less of white. But if you go look at then more of a micro level, and you go look at the numbers playing the game, and again, I don't have the statistics on this. Happily, if somebody wants to provide it for us to add some context to the conversation. But my sense would be, I mean, if you go to say a school cricket on a weekend in Joburg or Cape Town may be slightly different because the communities there are different. But if you go Joburg and you go to a cricket game on a weekend, you are not going to see cricket teams filled with black Africans and one white kid. You're not going to see that. It doesn't live like that. I'm sure if you go to PE, there might be a bit of a balance, but if you go to your predominant schools, where I know that's a whole different conversation, where the privilege lives in the schools and not in the townships. But if you go around, even if there is township cricket, you'll have one team playing against, say, 10 teams that have got 3 or 4 players of color, which are not all black African, and the vast majority might be white, right? Especially, like I said, if you go to Joburg and Pretoria. And so that conversation, when it gets positioned in that way, always misses me, because I think it misses the point of this whole thing. For me, it should rather be, we're picking a cricket team of the best. That's the ideal world. And when we pick that, it is representative of our country. In other words, maybe there's 3 black Africans in there. Maybe there's an Indian or 2, hopefully 2 rather than 1. Maybe there's 2 or 3 players of color and there's 3 or 4 white, like whatever it might be. But we can all sit back and go, that is the best team, rather than heckling over how many because of the demographics. And I think that's the mark that we've missed. We've missed this opportunity over the last 25 to 30 years to develop everyone equally. And because we've developed them equally, we get to a place where we can say, look, here's the best. And we all can go, freaking hell, that's awesome. We love this. And this is our team. And we feel we're all included in some way. And I think that's the part that's been missed. I don't think it must be looked at demographics and that sort of, because I think it convolutes the conversation to a certain extent, Yeah,
100% agree with what you're saying, Jody. The only draw card on all of what you're trying to unpack is that historically, if you don't take into consideration how it came to be, we cannot argue the middle section and where we're going until we take cognizance of how it started. So if I go back to the original thing I said earlier, remember with apartheid, what it did was it divided racial groups and based on importance, on relevance, on specialness, right? So whites were number 1 priority. They were special. Then it was Indians. Then it was coloreds, and then it was blacks. Now those rankings, right? When we abolished apartheid and dismantled it, that didn't go away. That energy stayed there. And that spirit stayed there. We didn't address that spirit, but we attempted to make systemic changes, and that remained. So you'll have comments in colored and maybe Indian communities. I don't know if in black communities as prevalent, but you'll have this phraseology based on the rankings, because now white is the supremo, number 1, right? And automatically, if I say you're the special kid, you're gonna react that way. You're gonna act like you're in charge. You're the guy that everyone looks to, and you got the answers, right? Everyone speaks up. You'll hear Trevor Noah speak about, look at the boldness of the white guy. Why? You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So that's what it creates. But in South Africa, we didn't play that out, particularly inside cricket. What we did say in those communities was we're wanting to be like white people, because they're the privileged ones who are getting the benefits, who are achieving, or you know what I mean? Because you got all the kind of everything to go with it. The established networks, the established infrastructure, economy, capital opportunities, all sat there. So basically, we started, call it funny, like ironically, kind of humorously, kind of say, oh, you're keeping your white. What that means is you're pretending to be a ranking higher than where you supposedly need to slot in, because your skin color determines that you should be 1 less than, but you're trying to escalate yourself. Now, that rankings remained within industries in South Africa, particularly within sport. And when you go into teams, that plays itself out. So a lot of that context, you need to put that lens on and see how these things play out, and therefore people who feel aggrieved based on feeling less important on those previous rankings, which wasn't addressed. So when you bring up the soccer example, you're talking about, they're saying that it's representative of South Africa, but we don't really transform or truly reflect a change based on quantitative information. It needs to be qualitative. It needs to be the spirit in which we are doing things, right? Black South African cricket team, there are tons over the years, even under those previous times. It wasn't as much funded because we were suppressed under apartheid, non-white as well, right? But it was there, and there was a pride and a joy to it. But when it got unified, it was almost second graded based on those rankings. So those rankings continue, that paternalistic attitude continue. So everything that we've done going forward was with that nuance, with that theme. So therefore, we're feeling the suffering of that all the years. And by the way, it's the white people that are also suffering because they're in a prized position that they shouldn't be. We should be equal, not ranked and higher. You understand? Just because you have the capability, the capacity money-wise or infrastructure-wise, doesn't necessarily mean you're more special. You're actually, in fact, just as equal as everyone. We're all special. So we needed to find a way to each other. You know what I mean? Instead of kind of competing and maintaining those subtle rankings and rights and privileges, right? And that's the real soft skill readdress that we need to have in order to get these things right. All the policies needs to be done in the right spirit. So all this, you need to play X amount of Black Africans, X amount of non-whites, only 5 whites in the team, all of those sorts of things. That's a whole bunch of hogwash, to be honest. And I say that respectfully, because you're missing the spirit of the thing. The spirit is we need to dismantle the sense of equality. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to reverse racism now, where we have blacks now saying, no, we were completely stone lost, so now we're entitled to be first, and you guys must go drop down. Because that doesn't solve anything as well, right?
Same problem, just backwards.
It's just exactly. So those things are constantly playing itself out. And this is some of the things that's under the covers that's going to bite these cricketers when they go to World Cups, because it gets heightened, right? And that's the pressure they're feeling. And even though we have a Siya Kolisi winning a Rugby World Cup, for instance, there's still those problems that needs to be addressed, because that type of mentality. So I was one told, and I'll say it plainly, by a hierarchical cricket persona, told me directly, if you play your cards right, you will get benefit, you'll get opportunity. This is a white guy in the system telling me, if you play according to these rights and you do what I kind of lead you on to do, then you'll get opportunity. So those sorts of things are constantly that's what I'm referring to about the gatekeeping, right? They're maintaining the gates of these privileges, of this paternalistic system, right? And that's continually going through. So it's just changing faces. So what we've replaced the racist South Africa with apartheid with is privileges, almost like a status kind of scenario. So you can be a Black African, but because you're regarded as one of the old whites, you now you position yourself at the top. And then you're dictating down to the lower levels. And that's how you carry yourself. You get my point? So there's no sense of equality and whatever. And that's why you've experienced it in your own space as well. You'll have silos, particularly in all industry, but in the game, you'll feel it, where people are guarded about what they do, right? They got the silo type of barriers where they're protecting themselves instead of sharing openly, because this is our game and we need to come together and love and contribute and do freely, give to another type of thing. They don't do that. They rather have a siloed approach of, I need to protect this, because otherwise I'm going to be outshined by someone who can jump over me and take precedence over me. And that for me is why I feel we need to first go back to that drawing board, unpack those things and how those type of effects plays out in a team. So for instance, we're constantly, this whole narrative of pushing a Black African captain, it's to kind of get that balance right and trying to work it out and say, no, we need to have someone representative of us so we don't feel less than. But you're not going to feel less than just because you put a Black African captain there, whether it's Siya Kolisi in rugby or Themba Bavuma in cricket. It's not going to matter. You know what I mean? Or anyone else. It's the matter of, why do you feel less than, and can we dismantle these barriers? And it's an easy way to do it as long as we're having this straightforward conversation,
Yeah.
So for me, that's the main thing. And, I'll go on to the next one if you want to comment on this, so that, because I got a next point to add on to
Yeah.
it.
No, I hope you'll remember your point, right?
Yes,
Otherwise,
I will.
you must make it. Okay. So as you're speaking, I'm sitting here and I'm going, I hear you, right? And I'd love to hear your take on, because we talk about the gatekeepers, and I do hear you talking about that there's now a Black African at the top there that's sort of doing the same. But let me say it as I'm thinking it, as you spoke about it. There are these gatekeepers, but we've got boards across the country that are transformed. So in your top positions isn't necessarily white people anymore. And so I'm just struggling a little bit, if I can say it like that, to make sense of the what you're explaining and how that's playing out in your perspective, knowing that boards are supposed to be transformed. If you and not just transformed racially, but also between male and female, right? There's all these other issues that we haven't even spoken about, the male-female part in this conversation, because that's also a transformation thing. That's also something that's becoming part of our game and is very prevalent at this point in time. Female coaches, female admin, female CEOs, female players, that's professional in our country at this point in time. And so I'm sitting here and I'm going, okay, cool. I hear what you're saying. Maybe there's a part I'm not understanding quite yet, or I'm not getting it yet. But I'm also seeing that we're supposed to be transformed. We're supposed to have broken down some of these barriers and these things, that these hierarchical systems.
Yeah, the transformation definition is probably essential here. So just because we have representation that's a little bit diverse, right? I don't think that's a reflection entirely of transformation. That's just in my book. You have to be transformed from the inside out, which means you have to dismantle the way you've previously related one to another. If there was the sense of more privilege or superior or specialness, that needs to be unpacked and kind of dismantled. And that we haven't done. So just because we have a widespread board that kind of oversees it and it's representing of the country, and we got 95% or whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, how well have they dismantled their previous thinking of times past, right? So for instance, you're talking about female representation, right? If females particularly have been suppressed, and they have been, and not given the leeway and the kind of right of way to certain positions, right, of leadership, of influence, of authority, of positioning, right? If they haven't got given that, how do they now come into those positions and handle themselves well to be able to say, having been suppressed and now getting given this proper freedom, can I do it well? You know what I mean? You need to be kind of showing the ropes that I'm constantly being battered and being told that I'm less than, your voice doesn't matter. We're actually excluded. Now, all of a sudden, I'm like the driver of this. So how do I do this? So it's a transformation that needs to happen in that way. The spirit in which you're going to engage needs to be seen like, okay, can I tap into my natural capacity, which is I'm a female, so I'm going to probably be most, and I'm generalizing, very empathetic. Let me tap into the emotional side of who I am as a female, and let me bring that as a strength to this table, because they didn't have it before. And that's what we need, right? Bring your uniqueness to the table. As a white South African, bring your uniqueness to the table. As a Black South African, bring your uniqueness, not what apartheid's old conditioning has done, even if it's generational. It's flipping 3-4 generations down, right? 30 years down the line. But we still have these nuances because our society kind of reflects that to an extent. Still till today, there's this marginalized segments, right? But it's not a colored thing necessarily. It's a status thing. It's an elevation of who's more important based on how you can represent that, how you can flow that. And those are the straightforward type of conversations we need to have. So, for instance, I'll should explain it to you. We talk about, and I have colleagues and stuff, we can openly say this, where certain Black representation gets chosen. And I'm saying Black because it can be colored, it can be Indian, it doesn't matter. It's those who are pliable, who are open to playing your cards right? Which simply means is, can you be conditioned or civilized in the same manner in which we think? So we regard those particular non-whites as weak non-whites, right? Weak Blacks, weak coloreds, weak Indians, because all they've done was to be civilized by white authority or white specialness rankings. And that's, again, it's a fallacy, because it doesn't necessarily mean because you're white, you're right. Anybody can be right based on principles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like Black is not entitled just because you suffered. You understand what I'm saying? So there are the historical hurts and readdress that needs to happen and reparations maybe, but the point is it doesn't necessarily make you entitled. There's no, so those are the type of conversation that you have to straightforwardly have, similar to the SJN, but actually not create just a platform for people to air, but actually really go and constructively. The objective is to have relationships tight, right? And then we find out what we can do together. Find a way to connect heart to heart with each other, right? And break down these superficial pseudo rankings and privileges, and then we find a way to each other, we respect each other. Now we can go build our nation. Similar to when Mandela came out, I'll just use this example. And I'm not necessarily blowing up as a hero worship of Mandela here, but I'm just saying, when he was in prison, how did he get equipped to be able to lead a country? He was one who was suppressed, who went through a whole rigmarole evolution of his life, and then he came in and was this leader of a country. How does that work? There was massive support and a connection found. Whether it's sincere or insincere, we don't know. There's a lot of talk around those sorts of things. But the point is, you can't be from someone who's been oppressed, marginalized, jailed, almost given whatever forms of negative labels, and all of a sudden you become this instant hero worship. That transition has to be intentional. And I think as a society, we haven't done that. And definitely as a cricket team, we haven't done that. Not consciously, at least. We've been ignoring the soft skills heavily. We made it purely about bat and ball. And we made it purely about, can we win the series? Can we be number one? And all of that. But you can see what the missing conversation, what it's causing. We're going to constantly be failing, and at critical times it's gonna be a choke, because there's heavy stuff that we need to deal with, and these are part of the conversations.
So I have I made two notes here. The first one is I don't know if you've mentioned your second point yet, and if you still remember it.
Let me share it quickly. Because I think yours might take it in another direction. So currently, South African cricket, and I'm very much aware of this because I drove this thing myself with, let me just say it, with a current leader in this space, right? Cricket landscape has been in a space of mechanical style of leadership, where it was merit and status and wins and all of that. And it's kind of evolved from that space where winning was basically all that mattered. And I can reference some documentation on this, to what we're now referring to as more an empowered space, where we're more people-centric, where we're considering all forms of stakeholders, where we're having the sense of belonging, sense of, the main catchphrase here is we want to operate like a family, right? That's kind of where they're wanting to go. And I hope it's okay for me to mention this, but JP Duminy was one of the guys that we kind of drove that into the cricket ecosystem, right? And this type of terminology is called, or is a metaphor of the family, and it's an empowered space. Now, it's a step up from where we come from. It's not just about the win, not just about succeeding. We've gone and considered people more now, right? We've kind of opened up the spaces. But with the sense of just labeling something, because it's still one level up, but not necessarily the best we can be, is when you speak about empowerment, you automatically assume that all that you're doing is to empower, which in and of itself can be quite patronizing, right, for some people, because automatically some others will be either disempowered by other actions. So when you find yourself in the game, for instance, and you're in a disempowered space, all you're familiar with is now this new empowerment thing where you must back me despite me falling short of success, runs and whatever. Because all we have now is this whole family. I love you no matter what. We are family. And we're kumbayaing and we're not getting over the line, right? So that there's very much shortcomings in that. But we needed to go there towards the people-centric, or people, at least awareness or openness for that. Because there's another evolution after that, which is what we must actually hit. But we need to discover what are the things that are actually crippling people. And just having empowerment, as you would say, if you talk about empowerment, just tell any South African male, we need to go for, what do they call this? Marital counseling, right? We'll kick up a fuss. But if we start calling it marital empowerment, maybe we will gravitate towards it because we feel like it's going to boost our egos, right? But the point is, with empowerment, we might also have this nuance of disempowerment experiences from time to time. So it really is, that's where they're currently poised. And if we're not careful with this empowerment thing, we're going to bring back through the back door, the side door, these rankings again, which is going to come back to bite us. Because empowerment looks differently for different people there, right? And we're not going to unpack that details now. There's lots to that. But empowerment looks completely different to a white guy, to a black guy, to an Indian guy, and a colored guy. You're completely different. So that's why when you talk about that, you need to be very much aware of how that things are played out. So yeah, I just want to add that.